What Hivello does, it actually takes away all that crypto complexity. People can use it and point and click like using Spotify. That's what I find so exciting, because we, to a degree, collectively as an industry, we are helping create the future. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, and both good and bad, that's how we build a really good product.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unleashing DePIN Podcast. My name is Tyler. I'm your host. And like always, I am very excited for our next guest. This is a project that I have been using actually for quite some time in the space. I think they're solving a really big problem. I've loved watching their journey over time. So I'm super excited to have Dom. He is one of the co-founders of Hivello. Dom, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Fantastic. And thanks for having me, Tyler.
I'm really excited to have you here. As I mentioned, I've been a customer of yours for forever. It's funny because being in the DePIN space, doing the podcast and everything, I'm always getting people asking me, what are you using? What are you mining? How are you finding different projects? And so you guys are solving such a great pain point. You're making it really easy to get into DePIN. And so I love that you're solving that problem for the masses. But that being said, I want to maybe jump in with just a little bit of an introduction about yourself. As I alluded to a little bit earlier, I've been tracking your guys' journey, and I think it's been fascinating how you've been pivoting. You went from, I believe, hardware into kind of the software side of DePIN, really aggregating these different things. But I'd love to get into how you got here, and we can kick it off from there.
Yeah, fantastic. Been involved in tech since mid-90s, got into crypto in 2013, launched a number of companies in the space. The most notable is a company called Banksa. And the reason I bring that up is there's quite a few similarities between Banksa and what we're doing here at Hivello. Banksa is one of the leading fiat on and off ramps in the space. In fact, second behind MoonPay from a transaction volume perspective. And the whole genesis around Banksa was back in 2013-14 was that crypto was fairly new, and for those people that wanted to get involved in crypto, they started with a US dollar or a euro. And our view was that we needed to make that first step as simple as possible, to take that euro, the US dollar, and convert it into, back then it was really Bitcoin and not much else. And so fast forward to where we are today, saw the same kind of opportunity in the DePIN space. And I know we're going to do some double clicking on DePIN and the whole industry, and just saw that it's challenging for a lot of people to get involved in DePIN. And we wanted to take the learnings from Banksa and what we learned. The simpler we made the process, the higher the conversion rates, the happier the customer. And so really trying to do the same thing with Hivello. And I think we're on our journey, and loving it so far.
Yeah, I think you guys are solving a big problem, as I alluded to. It's challenging to either keep track of all these different projects. The barrier to entry can be difficult, whether it's buying hardware. I've just been working with a VC here in Austin, setting up a hardware device and having a lot of challenges. So you're really streamlining that process, which is amazing. I wanted to circle back real quick on a bit of your background, because I believe you didn't your previous company go public in Australia. I want to say you had quite a bit of success. You mentioned your on and off ramp was second to MoonPay, which is fairly staggering numbers. So you guys are really legitimized in the space, right?
Yeah, I'm going to say claim to fame, as some people put it. I listed my first company on the Australian Stock Exchange when I was 25, so quite a few years ago. In fact, about 25 years ago, and also listed a few companies on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is where Banksa lives today. And in fact, I should also say that Banksa has actually just had a takeover bid from a big NYSE company the other day. A company called Exodus basically announced a bid. But anyway, that's not here to talk about Banksa, albeit there are a lot of learnings from the Banksa and just really being in crypto experience. But I see significant opportunities in DePIN. And for me, I think DePIN is going to really help bring on the next 100 million people into crypto. And I think the more people in crypto and decentralized finance, the better the world will be.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with your assessment there. I'm curious, what was I'm super interested in kind of the genesis story of Hivello, but what was the initial introduction you had to the space? A lot of people get in via Helium, but that's not always the case. So what was your sort of introduction to DePIN? And then how did that begin to help you shape this opinion of, we really need to make that onboarding process easier? And we can talk about how you're doing that at Hivello.
Yeah. In fact, maybe I'll once again just go back 30 or 40 years. There was a little company called NASA, I'm being silly there, and this is really an example of the first type of decentralized compute. So NASA was generating all of this content, all of this data from their telescopes and satellites around the world, but they didn't have the processing power in terms of just trying to work out what's there. And so they set up this research lab called SETI. And so I remember as a teenager, I downloaded SETI onto my computer, and the concept was every night I would download data, my computer would process that data, and then send it back to SETI, hence NASA. And that was the first example, real life example of decentralized compute. Now, this is obviously before blockchain and before tokens, and humans being humans, there's got to be a what's in it for me type scenario. And if you found a star or a planet, you could actually name that star or the planet. Now, I remember having two machines running concurrently. Every morning I'd wake up hoping that I'd find a star or a planet that I could name. Unfortunately, that didn't occur, but it was fun nevertheless. And that was really, you talk about how did I get involved in DePIN? I mean, that's getting involved even before the internet and even before all things crypto. So that was, I guess, my first opening the eyes. And then being involved with obviously Banksa and the number of other companies, crypto companies in the space. My first foray into DePIN before it was called DePIN was actually Helium. We started deploying Helium nodes within the European market, and that was a good learning or a good stepping stone into what's possible with decentralized infrastructure. But we also realized that our core, we're software people. We love software, we're software nerds. And so that kind of took us on a bit of a U-turn with hardware, but we learned a lot from that process. And then that's really the genesis of Hivello and the software where people BYO, bring your own machine, bring your own hardware. Because as we know, there are tens of millions of laptops and desktops sitting in desks and drawers or within offices, only utilized a percentage of the time. And hence, from my perspective, that's an opportunity. And that's why Hivello is all about software.
Yeah, I love that. By the way, you can't see it, but I've got a desk just to the side of me here that's stacked full of extra computers and Deepin hardware devices. And so the pain point is real. I also did not know that NASA effectively built the first Deepin, which is interesting. I'm going to have to deep dive into that a little bit more. So you got in through, I guess, the NASA side and then Helium. You guys mentioned your software. If I'm not mistaken, you toyed around with developing some hardware previously. Is that correct?
We were actually working with the Helium devices. And this is obviously before DePIN was called DePIN. And what we were doing with those Helium devices is they're running a Raspberry Pi, which is a little Linux device. And we worked out we could run other software, other DePINs, basically piggybacking on that hardware. And that was like the aha moment of actually, what if we take that concept of aggregating and orchestrating DePINs, but having software that runs on third-party machines? And so that was really the step. And then we spent the last 12, 18 months building out, engineering the software. And I think what we've created so far is it's still in beta, and you're a user of the software. But from my perspective, it looks and feels like you're using Spotify or iTunes. It feels like a Web 2 experience, but behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of Web 3 stuff going on. And that for me is really, and I think this is taking a step back, one of the opportunities and the challenges for all of us in Web 3 is how do we make experiences that mirror Web 2 experiences? Because I think we're all geeks around here. We all love the technology, but in terms of trying to bring on the next 100, the next 1 billion people, they don't want to, and they shouldn't have to learn about all of this technical stuff and private keys and using Docker and Kubernetes and multiple wallets. They just want to point and click, and I just want to generate passive income and just make it super simple. And once again, that's really our promise to customers is you do not need to be a technical genius to be able to use DePIN. And if you're a nerd like me, it's actually just going to save a hell of a lot of time in terms of maximizing those rewards, because we'll do a double click on on the software, but part of what we do is we work out what's your system configuration, what country you're in, your IP address, and then it will install the best DPINs to maximize that ROI. And then over time, using our onboard AI agent, it will personalize the DPINs that are running on your machine on a very regular basis, because as you rightly pointed out, there are new DPINs that are coming out all the time. There's different rewards. Those rewards changes depending upon the country or even the day of the week. And so ultimately what we're going to be able to do is chop and change those DPINs to maximize ROI for our customers.
I love that. You guys are definitely making it super simple. And to your point, the barrier to entry can be difficult, but over and above that, all of these different projects, they have different hardware requirements, they have different specifications, like your computer needs certain specifications, and being able to abstract away that complexity for people is really going to, in my opinion, drive the needle or move the needle in terms of major adoption. And so you alluded to it, you talked about some of the different components. Can you maybe give like a high level overview of what it looks like to onboard into the product, how it works, maybe some of the different DePIN networks that are currently a part of that, and unpack that for listeners?
Yeah, and so in terms of the software, it works both across Windows, Mac, and Linux. And I'll come back and talk more about why we produced a Linux version. And so the interface is super simple, and I encourage people go to hivello.com and download it and see for yourself. And so what it will basically do is work out your system config, install the DPINs. From a back-end perspective, it manages all the various wallets, so you don't have to think about all these different DPINs that run across multiple chains. And then you basically get to see, these are the DPINs, this is how much I've earned in the equivalent of USDT or US dollars, because that's really a common language that most people in crypto know. And then there's a Hivello point system. Like a lot of crypto projects, there's a concept of a cold start, and we're using the points, which then convert or airdrop into the Hivello token, and I'll talk about our TG as well. And then rewarding people through not only the DePIN tokens that they're mining, but also the Hivello points that convert into the Hivello token, which then they can stake and earn an even higher percentage of the rewards. Really trying to create a flywheel or network effect with regards to our system. And we've just launched Nasana. Nasana is one of the leading companies, DePIN companies in the AI training space, using your GPU. And in fact, that's one of the key verticals in DePIN that I'm most excited about, purely because there's huge demand for training, GPU hashes. And so there's tens of millions of GPUs and gamers that have got this particular hardware sitting at home or at the office that can be tapped into. And then we can also talk about some of the economics around doing it in the decentralized way versus a centralized way. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more insight with regards to how we operate at Hivello.
Yeah, I think you've really streamlined that process. And I love your analogy of it's Spotify, where you can just install it and you just click and choose and it starts working. How many actual DePIN networks, if you will, are currently on the platform today?
Yeah, as of today, we've got 7, and our target is 50 DePINs integrated by the end of this year, and then letting AI optimize. And what we also, part of the system is you can earn the native DePIN tokens, or you can select just pay me out in USDT, or if you don't want to touch crypto, just basically pay me straight into my bank account. So that's really appealing to both the Web3, hardcore Web3 users, as well as those users who maybe aren't that interested in crypto at this stage, but this is their toe in the water. And the way that we make money from a Hivello perspective is really simple. The software is free, and we just take a revenue share of the tokens that are mined on your computer. Our interests are absolutely aligned with our customers. The more you make, the more that we make as well. That for me is, once again, that's why I love the model and the opportunity. It's like there's no risk from a consumer perspective, and frankly, it's all upside.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I think one of the things that's really interesting is that you're adding a whole host of projects targeting 50, having the AI to essentially go in and optimize your machine. So it's participating in the networks that's the best for everybody is super unique. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that development has worked, or how that is kind of interfacing with customers today?
Yeah, so internally, we've got a team, and currently we've got a multiple DPINs running effectively, let's call it, we're testing, and we've got a whole team that's just managing that particular process. We also get feedback from the community around these are the kinds of DPINs that they'd like to see integrated into Hivello. And we've also got DPINs just approaching us on a weekly basis saying, can we integrate with Hivello to get access to our distribution, our supply side? Because if you, once again, just to take a step back, if you look at the DPIN space, there's DPINs that require hardware and there's DPINs that can work on standard desktops and laptops. That's the area that we're focused on. Then when you look at the actual part of the ecosystem, you've got the DPIN, usually very tech focused, very centric in that respect. Then there is what they call the demand side. So it's the companies, the businesses using the services of this DPIN. And then there's the supply side, which is the ultimately millions of computers around the world that are sharing their resources, contributing to that. Now, Hivello is focused very much on that supply side for DPINs that can work on standard desktops and laptops. And so part of our longer term vision is to basically build an API and an SDK that allows new DPINs to integrate with Hivello very easily without us having to write too much code from an integration perspective. Just really trying to create a much, I guess to a degree, it's not a marketplace in the traditional sense, but that kind of concept. And if I fast forward 5 years and really look at where I think we can really add value to the whole ecosystem, if you just think 5 years' time, we'd have hundreds of DPINs running on the platform. And then I'd love to be able to expose an API at the top that integrates all of these DPINs. So businesses, students, the community can just tap into one DPIN and get access to literally hundreds of DPINs behind the scenes. Now, that's a very difficult technical challenge. That's why we love it. That's why we do it. But for me, that's if I'm looking over the horizon, I think that's what we can ultimately do with Hivello. However, the chicken and the egg, in this scenario, the egg comes first, and the egg is the supply side. I think as an industry, we need to build out the supply side, the millions of computers around the world, and I think that will then give confidence to companies, to businesses on the demand side to basically want to get involved and use DePIN infrastructure. And there's a number of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into, why people want to use DePIN or decentralized infrastructure.
Yeah, you're definitely solving a multifaceted problem with a really elegant approach. And I think for builders in the space that are trying to solve that initial cold start problem with respect to their supply, this serves as a really incredible distribution channel for being able to do that. You mentioned you've got a lot of projects that are coming to you. You're targeting 50. What are those kind of early conversations like? Is it they're coming and saying, wow, I can go from 0 to 5,000 nodes, 10,000 nodes overnight? Is that sort of the initial draw? I just think that's if you're a builder and you want to tap into this infrastructure or sort of this network all of a sudden, that's a huge value add.
Yeah, there's actually two reasons. One is obviously we'd love to get access to 20,000, 50,000 nodes by a single click of a button. And the way that some of those deals will work is, one, they'll obviously need to pay us a number of their native tokens, which we would share with our users, with our customers, to basically give them access. So once again, giving our users reward for running the DPINs and doing it in such a way that they traditionally wouldn't be able to get access to. And then secondly, it's that we've built this orchestration layer behind the scenes. So you don't need to run Docker or Kubernetes, understand about wallets and private keys and public keys and staking and all of that other crypto stuff. And so they see the opportunity, if they want their DePIN on the supply side to appeal to a wide audience, what Hivello does, it actually takes away all that crypto complexity. We can integrate their DePIN and people can use it and point and click like using Spotify. So they're really the two core reasons why. And then obviously the third way that we'll end up working, not only will they need to provide us a number of tokens that we share with our community, they'll also at some point need to buy and stake the Hivello token to prove that they're serious about doing this. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about our TGE in a moment as well.
Yeah, I wanted to double click on one thing that you mentioned with the sort of the future. You're really solving a big problem with supply and sort of the future state where you're helping on the demand side. One of the things that's really interesting about Hivello is that it puts you in a unique situation to not only aggregate the types of projects that are on, but for customers that are looking to access this, maybe you need decentralized compute, but you also need, call it like a privacy or obfuscation layer. You're really in a position where you could, through your future APIs and SDKs, enable like a one-click access to both of those without necessarily needing to go to multiple individual providers. Is that right? Is that sort of the future that you're looking to build to also satisfy some of the potential demand side interest that's coming from businesses?
Yeah, and I think once again, as we say, we've got to crawl before we walk. I think this is a journey in terms of making decentralized infrastructure the norm. But if you go back, once again, just to go back into the past, if you look at the genesis of the internet was really all about decentralization. Back in the mid-90s, when I got involved in the internet, we used to build our own websites and host them at a computer at home or at the office. That was the norm. And then over time, things became much more centralized. And I think what DePIN is doing is basically going back to the ethos of the internet, going back to the ethos of crypto chain and Bitcoin. And so it's just a natural progression back to decentralization. And so there's a couple of reasons for that. I think ultimately decentralized networks are much more resilient. There are certain things that you can only do in DePIN infrastructure that you can't do in centralized infra. For example, being able to share residential IPs, particularly if you're an SEO company or a marketing company and you want to see what does my website or certain content look like within this particular IP range in this state or in this particular country. You can't do that through data centers. You basically want retail IPs. But then there's also a major cost benefit. And I alluded earlier to the verticals that I believe that have significant opportunity in the space. And that's really the whole AI space. We know AI is growing. The demand for GPU hashes, GPU cycles is continuing to grow at an exponential rate. And most companies are going to and using the Amazons and the Googles of the world. But my view is, and we're starting to see a big uptake in decentralized AI training. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We've just integrated Asana. We're looking at all the others like the Akash's, GPU, IONET, Exabits of the world as well. Ultimately, we want to integrate the majority of them. But there's a real commercial reason why a lot of companies are looking at DePIN, and that is you can actually use decentralized DePIN infrastructure to train your models at an 80 to 90, that's 80-90% discount to the centralized companies. And it was only when I did a deep dive into this area that I discovered why is that as a fact. And that is, if you're a consumer, you can buy some hardware, NVIDIA graphics card for $500 up to $2,000. If you are an enterprise and you want to buy the same kind of card with the same kind of output, it costs you around 10 times the amount. It comes in a nice rack with multiple cards, with nice management software, but it costs 10 times the amount. But given that the input costs to run that infrastructure in a centralized world are materially higher by multiple factors compared to the decentralized world, it then obviously would mean that the cost to use that infrastructure in a decentralized world is going to be a fraction of the cost of the centralized groups. And I think that's one real life example that's unfolding as we speak, where there is a commercial reason why that actually makes sense to do. And part of our, just to jump around a little bit, one of our lead investors is a group called Animoca Brands. Animoca Brands is one of the leaders in the gaming space, in the Web3 gaming space. The reason they invested in us wasn't just for a financial return, but was also because they've got a large community of gamers that would absolutely benefit from Hivello and ultimately giving them an opportunity to earn extra income. They were huge in the play to earn space, particularly that was really big over COVID. In fact, it's still big in a number of markets today. And once again, it's the audience with Hivello matching that together. And that's one of many reasons why Animoca Brands invested in us.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about the kind of the synergies between portcos, if you want to think about it from that standpoint. But also, you're right. We've talked to a lot of the folks in the space who are on the centralized GPUs, compute, all of these things, and the value add with the decentralized approach is staggeringly more beneficial than what you get in the centralized world. And so you guys are a huge enabler for that. I was curious, you talked about different verticals outside of AI. I know you've got different networks, live peer and storage. What are some of the other verticals that are really received or receptive to the Hivello model, or other verticals in the space that you're interested in, maybe outside of just AI specifically? Is that something you're able to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, so there are good and bad things. AI and GPU, it means you've got to have a specific type of hardware. But if you look at other DePINs that are, I'm going to say, quite light from a CPU perspective, things like VPNs or CDNs, virtual private network, content distribution networks, storage. So they don't tax a lot of the CPU. They either use your storage or they're more about your bandwidth and your IP. So I actually like those verticals because that can be used on we've got people running Hivello on 10-year-old machines that would traditionally be thrown in the bottom drawer or, God forbid, thrown into landfill, which unfortunately still happens today. So there's this whole, not only does DePIN make sense and we're talking about democratizing infrastructure, it's also actually helping the environment. All of this latent hardware that would have gone to landfill can actually be reused. So there's millions of computers around the world, and at some point in time, we'll look at mobiles as well. But for now, we're focusing on desktops and laptops. They can be reutilized. And I think that's good for business and that's good for the environment.
Yeah, that is a huge benefit. I know there's a couple DePIN projects specifically that are really targeting reducing tech waste by leveraging existing hardware devices. You did mention the mobile thing, which is interesting. Right now, I know you've got a desktop app. What does the future of mobile look like with Hivello? Because I know that I've got a lot of DePIN apps on my phone that I'm using. Are you guys looking at that as part of your roadmap by chance?
I don't want to make any predictions because I think we've got our hands full based upon what we're doing today. But that mobile is something that we've definitely looked at. But just to, once again, I alluded to, we've got a Windows version and the Linux version and Mac version. And the reason we made a Linux version, there are not that many people out there that are running Linux desktops and laptops. There's a few nerds out there who are doing so, but it's not that common. However, if you look at Helium, Hivemapper, and all of these DePINs, these hardware DePINs, the majority of them are running what is called a Raspberry Pi, which is a little mini computer. And what's that running? That's running Linux. The reason, one of a number of reasons why we also built a Linux version is because we can effectively install Hivello across all of this other infrastructure, this existing DePIN infrastructure. And if you want to get crazy around some of the ideas, some of the things that we've toyed around, and I think cars, a lot of electric cars, you just take the Tesla, the amount of computing power in these cars is amazing. And they're usually sitting in the garage, not doing too much for 80, 90% of the time. So if you just take all of these desktops and laptops, you take all of these cars, all of these other DePIN devices, can ultimately be running Hivello, contributing to a decentralized network, making their owners money. So actually helping pay off the car or pay the electricity for actually running Hivello and running various types of compute. So I think that's ultimately a win for everyone in the space.
Yeah, I definitely agree. As you were talking about the different hardware devices that are already out there, I'm like, man, there's such a perfect synergy between installing Hivello on all of these resources that we've set out there that, and a lot of times, as you mentioned, can be either underutilized resources or there's just further opportunities that they can do. So if you've got what does the Linux journey look like for Hivello users? Is it, I've got a Raspberry Pi, or could you install this directly on one of the Helium IoT devices pretty seamlessly and get that running? Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
Yeah, obviously, it's super easy if you've got a Windows or a Mac device. You download the software, you literally point and click and you're done. If you've got a Raspberry Pi, it's one extra step. You basically need to install Hivello on an SD card, and you need to basically run that on the device. So there's a bit of an extra step. I'm sure we'll come up with a solution that will make that even easier, trying to do it over the air, but there is a bit of an extra step. But having said that, most people that are into that hardware usually have a little bit more techie than most, and that's usually a breeze for many in the space.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You definitely got a high proclivity to get your hands dirty with some of the technical nuances. So you've been building this sort of network and resource. You've got obviously the consumer facing applications that really make it so simple. Talk to me about your TGE. You alluded to your points system that'll be part of the airdrop, but what's on the roadmap for your TGE? Can you talk to really the importance of what your token does for customers that are already participating? I know you talked about it a little bit, but can you flesh that out for us further?
Yeah, so we TGE'd yesterday on a number of centralized exchanges, Gate.io and MEXC. Today we're on DEXs, we're on Radium, so anyone around the world can basically explore and buy and get involved in the Hivello token. We've actually just launched an ability to stake and actually earn a yield as well, just to really incentivize those that are early in the ecosystem. But ultimately, one of the key values of the Hivello token is the ability to earn it, stake it, and then earn a high percentage of the rewards. And effectively using it as, to a degree, a bit of a loyalty type token. So that's one stream. And then the other stream is a lot of DePINs now require you to stake their native token. And so if you're running 10 different DePINs, you'll need to have basically 10 different tokens of each of those DePINs, and then the gas associated with whether it's on Solana or Ethereum or Base or wherever else. And that's very complicated. And so part of our vision is that you are able to then buy and stake Hivello. And once you do that once, it will then open up the opportunity of all the other DePINs that require, whether it's $50 or $100 or $300 of staking and thousands of dollars of staking of some other DePINs. You just need to stake $50 or $100, and we're still working out on what it will look like commercially. You stake once, and you get access to all of these DePINs that require a heavy amount of tokens for staking. And that's the other part of the value proposition and how our token can add value. And then I mentioned earlier, new DePINs that come into the fold and want to get access to our network, they're going to also have to buy and stake the Hivello token to basically prove that they're serious, not too dissimilar to someone that's staking on an Ethereum or some of the other layer ones.
Yeah, that's huge. And being able to abstract away that complexity is really interesting. It's almost like you're taking what was the novelty of DeFi in some respects, and you're actually putting that in a way that's very tangible to just regular people that otherwise don't want to deal with that. One of the things that's relevant with staking is its reputation in some respects. It's ensuring network stability. How is the kind of the Hivello token with respect to staking strengthening that value proposition or driving a greater security layer or sort of insurance layer for these participants? Is that something you can talk about a little bit for people that maybe don't fully grok the whole staking component with all of this?
Yeah, and maybe I'll give an example of another token that uses staking as a concept, just to illustrate the point. Filecoin. So Filecoin is a storage DePIN. And so part of their economic model is that if you want to set up a storage facility, you obviously need to spend money on the hardware, but then you also need to buy Filecoin and you need to stake it. And by you staking it, at least within their ecosystem, they're telling the community that you are serious, that you are going to look after this hardware. You're going to make sure it's up 99.9% of the time. And then if you don't, there are penalties like slashing. Now, we're not looking to introduce any kind of slashing with Hivello, but that just illustrates one real-life example of Filecoin, who's one of the leading DePINs in the storage space, on how they're using their token as a way of, let's call it, building trust or reputation in the space. We may do that at some point in time. There may be certain DePINs that require $10,000 of staking to just run that particular node or something along those lines. And we know some of the GPU guys, we're talking not a few dollars, like thousands of dollars. And so what we may look to do is you stake Hivello, and you need to make sure that your computer is up and running 99.9% of the time, because otherwise you'll get slashed or you just won't earn the appropriate rewards. I mean, we're still working through a lot of that. That's one of the reasons I love this whole industry is we're basically starting with a blank sheet of paper. No one has done this before in this current way. And that's what I find so exciting, because we, to a degree, collectively as an industry, we are helping create the future.
I love that you are being a part of that and you're taking a first principles point of view on how to really enact that. So, but outside of the actual token component, you have a points element to the Hivello product as well. Really, can you unpack the specifics of the points? I know it's great for people, can probably analogize it to like loyalty or like credit card points you might get, but can you help folks understand really how that fits into the context of all of these things that you're building?
Yeah, so the point system was basically set up as a way to help cold start. And I know you mentioned cold start before, and I think I did as well. But just for those that are not aware of what does cold start mean? Now, in order to build networks, and I'm going to use another example or analogy of Helium, just because they've been around for a while. You had to go out there and spend $500 on this physical Helium device. And in order to provide incentive for people to go out there and spend money, invest money in buying these devices, there's this notion of cold start, using the tokens as a way of encouraging people to do that and rewarding those that are early. So if you bought a Helium device for $500 and you were the first person to run it within your area, you would basically earn a huge number of tokens. Particularly in the early days as the network was building up. And then as the network was building up, the number of tokens decreased because there was actually revenue starting to flow through the network, which you were able to share with. And so the whole concept around the Hivello points is as we're new and encouraging more people to jump on board, be the deal, we're using those points to effectively help incentivize people to download Hivello, and then obviously they can convert those points into Hivello tokens, and they can either then stake them for a yield, or if they want, they can just basically sell them on market.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great way to encourage the participation and incentivize the right behaviors, whether it's through staking or just getting into the app as well. And what's the general timeline? So this is an exciting day, because as we're doing this recording, you're live on Radium now. So you had the other two, which means that US folks or people in Europe will be able to participate. What's the timeline for kind of the points with, I believe there's an upcoming airdrop.
There's an airdrop that's going to happen. I think we haven't announced the exact date to the community. It's going to be in the next 2 to 3 weeks. There was just a bunch of tech work and stuff that we needed to do. So we would have loved to have done it all at the same time. But I tell you, it's been our team has done an incredible job in terms of getting to this point. There's been multiple team members that have been doing all-nighters, and there's only so many hours in the day, and we'd love to be able to replicate ourselves. And so, yeah, we're going to have that airdrop in the next couple of weeks. Once we've done that, and that's bedded down, then we'll look to do another airdrop maybe at the end of the quarter or the end of the following quarter, and then really get to a point where the whole thing's dynamic and people can just take their points, click a button, convert it into the token dynamically, seamlessly. So we just, once again, crawl before we walk. And the other thing that I must say, we've got a tremendous community, a tremendous following. The feedback, the encouragement, actually, and I'm going to say it's criticism. And when I say criticism, I've got a little saying, feedback is the breakfast of champions. We've got, I'm going to say, tens of thousands of people in our community who love what we do and who are just as passionate as we are, basically giving us feedback. How about these DePINs? How about making this change to the interface to be able to improve this? How about doing X, Y, and Z? For me, that just shows me that people are actually really loving what we're doing. And I love that. For me, that's, as I said, feedback is the breakfast of champions, and both good and bad. that's how we build a really good product. And we certainly encourage that. And if people, we're obviously on Twitter, and that's partly one and two-way conversation, but Discord is really where people get deep and roll up their sleeves. And so we love Discord, really active community there. And it's really, once again, we are building this because I think we're building something for the community and something ultimately that society overall can benefit.
I definitely appreciate that. And we'll have all of those links down below with respect to Twitter and Discord for people to go and check out. One of the things I wanted to ask you about with respect to community engagement, is there a role for community members to either sponsor or suggest other DePINs that they want to see brought into the network?
You don't need to look at Discord. I think a day wouldn't go by without a number of community members saying, hey, how about this and how about that? And sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't work. And so we always take it. We've got an internal funnel, all the ideas come in, there's an internal process, and then there's a team that looks at them and a couple of analysts, and their whole job is to try and work out what are the best next DePINs for Hivello to integrate. But once again, taking feedback from our community, because ultimately this is a community project.
I appreciate the fact that you guys are putting that as a high level of importance for what you're doing. For projects that are DePINs, if you're a founder, you're a builder, you're listening to this, you want to join the Hivello network, what does the entry point look like? Do you guys have a form on your website? Is there a place to reach out if you want to begin to have your DePIN be a part of the Hivello network?
I'd say hivello.com, on X, or on our Discord channels. There are multiple ways of basically getting through us. We've got a partnership manager. He's responsible for taking all of those leads and following him through. Absolutely. And I think next week we're at Consensus in Hong Kong, and the week after we got one of our team, it's them. So we're also going to a bunch of different conferences, and pretty much these days is every conference has got a couple of DePIN days, which once again we love, and it's just a way of networking with other DePINs and other people in the community.
We're going to be at Denver too, so we'll have to do a whole meetup of everybody when that's happening. Gosh, Dom, we've talked about so much. There's just an incredible amount of exciting things happening at Hivello with respect to the TGE that's happening right now, with the points, all the projects that are coming in. Is there anything else we didn't get a chance to chat about that you think is relevant for listeners to know, whether they're people that want to download the app and start engaging, or they're builders? Is there anything else we didn't get a chance to cover?
I think the first step for those that are listening in terms of getting involved in DePIN is start. Whether you start with Hivello or you start with another DePIN, obviously I'm going to suggest Hivello because you can manage a whole bunch of DePINs. It's an aggregator. You don't have to think about anything else. It doesn't matter. I think it's just about getting people to put their toe in the water, and they'll get a sense of a feeling of, I'm actually contributing and being part of building this network. And that's one part. And then the second part is I'm actually getting rewarded financially for building out this network. And as soon as I think people understand that as a concept, this kind of light bulb will go off. And that's actually, I am now part of the solution in terms of building out networks. And it's a bit, once again, I go back to when Bitcoin was effectively first started as a concept of decentralized money, disintermediating the big banks and governments around the world, and basically allowing people to interact without the middle person involved. It's the same feeling, it's the same philosophy. And I think I made this statement earlier on. I actually think DePIN is going to be I think it's actually DePIN and RWA. I think DePIN more than RWA, as in real world assets. But I think what these two verticals within Web3 are going to do is really bring the next billion people into crypto. And sometimes people say, where they talk about the Bitcoin price, or it's all moving too fast, I'm too late. What I tell people, actually, I was at basically a breakfast with an analyst, a research analyst in the space, and she was saying, in terms of where we are now, as compared to the internet, we are like the internet was in 1997. Facebook wasn't born, Google wasn't born, ChatGPT wasn't born. 1997. Just think of where we were and what we were doing with technology in 1997. That's how early we still are in terms of this whole crypto ecosystem. So
Yeah.
it is not too late to people out there. I just say, just jump in and do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's funny. I was on a space a few days ago, and we were chatting about just how infant this is, so nascent. And the example I gave was Apple's market cap is larger than basically the entire crypto market cap altogether. That's one company in one country. And so it's so early. And as we're talking about these things like physical infrastructure, these are huge markets that are ripe for disruption. And I feel like that's an incredible call to action. So you guys are spearheading that next billion users that are coming into the fold, which I think is so great. Gosh, Dom, this has been an incredible conversation. Like I said, I've been a customer, been a user for quite some time. I really appreciate what you're building. I think you make life easier for folks that are trying to get involved. You're really solving a big problem. I think you're going to be a ginormous catalyst for user adoption, which is critical for the space. So I want to thank you again for coming on. We're going to have all of those links below so people can go download the app. They can get it installed on Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever device they have. We'll have Twitter and Discord for folks. So the TGE is live. If you are in the US or if you're in Europe, you can now participate on Radium, which is phenomenal. And those points and airdrop the airdrop, I should say, will be coming soon. Dom, I think we'll wrap it up here. Just want to thank you again for coming on, and we'll see everyone on the next one. Thanks so much, Dom.
Thanks, Tyler. Thank you.
Cheers.